Hello and welcome to Module 2, Primary Conditions of our Urban Polling and Activator online course for Australian health professionals. My name is Juliette Fritchie. I'm a physiotherapist and Urban Polling Master Trainer, and I will be taking you through this first topic of older adults. So the first thing I'd like to show you is just a very short snippet of an older adult walking group, so you get a bit of an idea of how it has been used with older that are a little bit more active. This is just a bit of an introduction. So this is a very wet day in Canada, and just a group of more active older adults, although one of them had been on a walker and was walking before she started urban polling. So just a quick snippet to give you an idea of how you can use urban polls in a walking group with older adults. This is another video of less active older adults. It's a seated exercise to music group, and it's part of the recreation program of an independent living centre. So these people will be living on their own, but probably attending functions and eating in a dining room. So the music that they're using is New York, New York, which works really well with seated exercises, with polls. And you can see most of these, all of these exercises actually are upper limb work. One of the lovely things about this particular group is the man who runs it. He's now passed away, but he was one of the residents at the Independent Centre. So now they're doing some slower stretches. Okay, so let's look at older adults' physical activity guidelines. We did look earlier in Module 1 of the adult physical activity guidelines. These are older adults over the age of 65. And these are the Australian physical activity guidelines. So the first one is older people should do some form of physical activity no matter what their age, weight, health problems or abilities may be. Secondly, older people should be active every day in as many ways as possible, doing a range of physical activities that incorporate fitness, strength, balance and flexibility. The third point there is older people should accumulate at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity on most, preferably all days, which is very similar to the adult physical activity guidelines. Next, older people who have stopped physical activity or who are starting a new physical activity should start at a level that's easily manageable and gradually build up to the recommended amount, type and frequency of the activity. And fifthly, older people who continue to enjoy a lifetime of vigorous physical activities should carry on doing so in a manner suitable to their capability into later life, provided recommended safety procedures and guidelines are adhered to. And the reason they've put that in is because we're seeing more older adults who are very active coming into that 65-year age group. So they don't want people to suddenly stop after they've been running marathons or half marathons or doing very active physical activities. So the benefits for using poles in senior living and aged care are an increased motivation to exercise. I see that a lot with my people. It gives them something unique to bond them together in a group, but also to do. It's an active living thing as opposed to a disability. So if they need a stick, they are basically all of one's, everybody is together doing the same thing with the same equipment. And it's more of a active activity rather than something that is an assistant to walking. It does provide bilateral support, and it is therefore a falls prevention strategy. Also improve posture, especially their upper back, which we did talk about in the posture control PowerPoint earlier. And it does provide support and trunk control if you're doing exercises as well. And that's really important also, especially for outdoor exercises. It can also be done with children, friends, staff, and don't forget that older adults, the age range can be from 65 to over 90 to do this particular activity. And so it does, that's sort of 30 years. And so it does mean that older adults and younger older adults can all exercise together and comfortably. This is a program called Power Up Your Walk, which was put in place in residential independent living. And it's a really great way to include caregivers into an exercise program and an activity program. So spouses, children, staff, they will join in with this sort of activity. There aren't a lot of activities that people can do together. So urban polling is one of them. And family members and staff also get that benefit of being able to exercise. So some homes in Canada had community events that they have put in place where they're fundraisers, for example, and both the staff and the residents can be involved in that together. It's had quite a big success for employee wellness as well as for residents. So let's look at assessment of older adults. Look at their falls risk and balance, of course. Standing tolerance and walking tolerance comes into that as well. Their judgment. So ability to hear is quite an important consideration when you're dealing with older adults. Also their ability to understand and follow instructions. Coordination, and this just brings into play your initial teaching period. Once they get the hang of that left, right, they're usually quite fine to go on to it, but it may take a little while, a couple of sessions to get that correct. The usual contraindications for older adults are important. So things like comorbidities and other illnesses that are, and medication as well, are important to look at. So most clinics or centres have some sort of standardised test and guidelines, and you can use those for your urban polling groups. A little word about falls. Falls are, if somebody is an older adult and they have fallen, it does take them a while to regain their confidence, and oftentimes their physical ability is less as a result, depending on what injuries they have sustained. So it is a big reason why people stop moving as they get older. So the poles do provide this extra level, not only of support, but of confidence for people when they are moving back from a fall, moving into their regular exercises again. So you can add in poles in sitting and in standing. You can do pre-gait exercises, so weight shifting, stepping exercises. They're also small and compact, and that's especially important if people have very small spaces in their homes or in their yards to exercise in. They're a very social activity, very important for older adults. And they again, this ability versus disability, they look quite good. Our new poles are quite a striking sort of design, and so they look really good. 4 points of contact with the ground, so you have a larger base of support, and that provides increased balance. And they do promote this upright posture and bilateral core activation, trunk activation, which is really important, not just for their exercise, but then for if they're not using poles in some parts of their life, that will help to strengthen them and improve their functional ability. So I'm now going to go through 3 types of walking groups that you can have with older adults. So this is not to say you can't use poles with older adults on a one-to-one, but groups are such a lovely way to add in that social element to your exercise. So I'm going to look at walking groups, I'm going to look at outdoor exercise groups and indoor exercise groups. So urban poling walking groups, you can use activators for walking groups. This group on the right is a combination of my exercise and walking group that I hold of once a week. I hold one exercise group and one walking group. They are all using urban poles at this particular stage. So it improves cardiovascular fitness, really good for the fitter walkers, the younger walkers. They can actually use the poles to propel them and get that upper limb work happening. However, for many of our older adult clients, it's a matter of muscular endurance, and staying on their feet for an hour at a time is a really good way to build up that muscular endurance when they may be sitting for a lot of the day. Posture, especially upper back and core control and those hip extensors, is important also for this age group. An ability to keep going and doing daily functional and recreational tasks that are required is really important in the older adults. So one source of energy for older adults is vitamin D, and that is best taken through a little sunshine. So when the UV rays hit the skin, they get converted to vitamin D, and this process becomes less efficient as people age. Morning sun is also an interesting part of exercise, and if you can get an exercise group happening in the morning, what it does is help to regulate their circadian rhythm, and so as well as sleeping better because you've been using energy, you sleep better because of that regulation of circadian rhythm. Do not discount psychosocial benefits. Many adults live alone, and I have found starting up my groups post COVID-19 isolation, they just run virtually into their exercise groups because elder adults just really love that social connection. So it's an activity that can be done by older adults, and a lot of older adults live alone, but also younger walkers together. So the poles can be used as a support for those who need it and a fitness tool for those who want to push themselves a little more. So I've had groups consisting of almost 30 years of distance, as mentioned before. And afterwards, you can meet for coffee or breakfast together, and that's a lovely part of the exercise group as well. So here's some guidelines for initiating and continuing older adults walking groups. Firstly, important to have enough instructors and to make sure your clients are safe. So don't take them outside unless you're very aware that they're able to walk outside. And we'll talk about the type of terrain and the type of area that you need for walking outside a little bit later. If you're worried about how they're walking, assess them during seated and standard exercises, look at their pre-gait, look at their balance at the beginning of session. And if some clients are not suitable to participate in the walking session, they might be better off to do an exercise session. One option, if you've got more and less active walkers, is to split the class. So you could do a more active walking group outside and a less active walking group inside. And a lot of our independent living centres now have big long corridors that you can walk inside with, or if the weather's inclement. The other thing you can do is walking and picking up the slower group. So we do that for our walk. If you need to have people with one-on-one supervision, then do. And this 30% is kind of will keep coming back over this particular lot of PowerPoints, because it's very important to start at the lowest level of the 30% of the lowest level of the client. I will always walk with the lowest level client and keep them in my sights. So here's a few tips that I and others have found when you are doing a walking group. If it's a formal walking group, a pre-exercise screening system, this ESSA has a really good one for Australia, but there's also the PARQ, which is an international exercise assessment, which can be done, and that's a physical activity readiness questionnaire and assessment. So as much, it is important that to look at the type of terrain that you are walking in. A good rule of thumb is that people should be able to see ahead about 10 metres. So this isn't bushwalking, this is urban poling, Nordic walking, or it might be walking with activated poles. So look for a lot of visibility. Also, paved paths avoid the poles slipping. And so it's probably better to start a group and have a group with paved paths, because don't forget, if you're in a group, people will be talking and maybe not paying so much attention to where they're walking. So a safe path is important. If you are finding that your poles are slipping, you could take the boots off and you can use those carbon tips. Also with paved paths, watch for cracked pavements, and wider paths allow for people to pass more easily and also for walkers to walk two abreast. So if people are jogging or walking quickly, they can get past you. Walkers may have differing levels of activity, either between or within individuals. So on one week, somebody might have had a bit of a niggling injury, or they might not be feeling so well, so they might be walking not as fast as they usually are. So a circular route is very helpful, or a route that doubles back. And I have both of those in my 2 walks. So my circular route is about a 10-minute circular route that we can see the entire path. And some people will do one circuit, some people will do 2, and some people will do 3. Rest stops and water. We're in Queensland, so that's really important, especially in the summer. People with natural leadership, or those who are keen to contribute, are great to champion groups. They respond really well to becoming volunteer organisers, record keepers, collectors of money. I have one chap in my group who'll take up all the money and put in an envelope and tick everybody's names off. They will also organise social gatherings, Christmas parties, or end of year or mid-year gatherings. I've also had people in my groups who've been newsletter coordinators, and they generally keep people motivated. So when groups aren't walking, and over this last 3 months we have not had walking groups, we have had people who will check up on each other. So that's a really nice thing to try and identify in your groups. And I don't see my groups as exercise groups so much as wellness communities, and that's the way that they function. And it's a really lovely thing to see people making new friends and connecting and supporting each other in that way. And just at the end here, local Facebook pages as well as newsletters can be quite useful for people who are Facebook savvy. They don't have to be fancy at all, but it's a good way to have people connect with each other. So I'm now going to go on to exercise groups outdoors. So this is not walking groups, this is exercise groups, and my exercise outdoor groups are standing exercises. So these are really good for strength, coordination, balance exercises. Really, the exercises that you give people are only limited by your imagination, your exercise knowledge, and your creativity. So the new learning is a really important thing that I've found, and I try and introduce or reintroduce different exercises every couple of weeks at least. So people are always having to learn. They're always keeping their brain active when they're working out. And I'll just make a note about sensory stimulation there. So aspects that you get outdoors, which you don't get indoors, like wind, light quality, the surface that you're standing on is often constantly changing, and this is over the seasons and over the weeks. So it requires participants to adapt. So you have to be aware of that, but also it's a very positive thing for people, because that's where they function outdoors. People can't just live inside all the time. They need to be outside, and it allows them to adapt and to become more confident when they're outside and working outside. Again, psychosocial benefits, really important. So I do an individual assessment for everybody who is part of an exercise group, and I do the assessment in the park where we will be. And that means my exercise groups also have a walking component, so I can teach them to walk, I can do their PARCU or their ESSA, and I can assess them in the place where we will be exercising. It's a good idea to have a nice simple objective measure like a tug, walk speed, or a simple balance measure for reassessment. Check your council and park regulations. Most councils, certainly in Australia, have regulations as regards exercise sessions in the park. So they might require you to have public liability. professional insurance. They might require you to show your professional registration, and you may need to reapply on a yearly basis for a permit. My council allows groups of up to 10 people for free in parks, as long as I have met all their requirements. But after 10 people, if you're more than 10 people, they do require a payment. So check those things and keep those things in mind. I find there's not a great deal of difference between urban poles and activator poles. Generally, the type of pole you walk with is okay to exercise with. So if people are walking using urban poles, then they are usually stable enough to use them and the boot-shaped tips when exercising. If they require activator poles to walk with, then they would be better off with using the activator poles to exercise with. And having a couple of sets of poles for people to try out is helpful, just so people don't have to commit first off, and so they can see the poles. And oftentimes people will come with, you know, just some hiking poles that they've pulled out of their cupboard. And so if you can actually show them the difference with urban poles and how much better they are, it's very helpful, and they don't have to commit straight away. So here is the an exercise group indoors, and if you are exercising indoors, it is a really good way to have lower level clients work. The environment they're in is a much more controlled environment, so it's much safer, everything's flatter, there's good lighting, and you can keep a much better eye on the participants and assist those who require it. You also don't have to have people who need to stand up for an hour at a time, because you can always have chairs there. Functional activities are great to do in this environment. So things like pre-standing, and this particular photograph shows people doing forward translation, pre-standing work. You can do pre-gait, so you can do weight shifting, you can do stepping, you can do upper and lower limbs separately or together. Social interaction, again, is very important for this particular cohort. And one consideration is space. So just ensure that when you are working either individually or with a group with people with poles, you have the space to swing your poles out, swing them in. That makes it safe for everybody. So a couple of guidelines for exercises. If you're just doing seated exercises, it's more comfortable for people to lower the height of poles. To ensure, as I said, ensuring adequate space between clients is really important. And for clients with balance issues, make sure there's a sturdy chair or a wall behind them if they're just doing standing exercises, or you may need to provide support yourself. Encourage them when they're sitting to use the core grip, and you'll see, and there are some videos in the further PowerPoints that we're looking at people sitting and using those poles just to get that really nice upright posture, because you may notice when people are doing exercises in chairs, they always have a tendency to just flop back in their chairs and not stay up and forwards and come upright with so they're using their trunk, their abdominals, and their upper back muscles. So here are a couple of simple exercises. This is a modified Otago program maybe for people who are lower level. You can do upper and lower limb together as the top left hand exercise photo shows, or you can just do lower limb, or you can just do upper limb work. Nice idea, if you can, have chairs that don't have arms. it's easier for people and gives them a bit more space. And then it's safe because you can sit in a chair without arms and you can have the poles to support you. This is simple standing exercises based on based on the Otago program. So this is marching on the spot, abduction, and heel raises. And this last slide is more complex exercises. So I do these with my my higher level clients in my exercise classes outside. So the photograph on the left shows turn. The instructions that would be given would be raise your left hand, look at your left pole, and then you can add in the raise your left hand, lift your right leg, and look at the pole. And so you've got something concrete to look at. It's not just look up or turn your head. It's look at the top of the pole. And that's really nice when you're trying to do balance work with shifting heads, turning your head. The middle exercise is a stepping or a tapping exercise. So you can do a tap and return, or you can do a step over. And again, you've got something concrete to step over or to tap over. To add complexity, you can, I will cross the pole sometimes. So I will put the poles one way and one the other way. So you have 4 squares, and I will use a whole lot of instructions like tap left, tap right, tap diagonally, step diagonally. And you can make it even more complex by naming the squares. So you've got square 1, 2, 3, 4, tap 1, step 2, tap 4, step 3, and you can get people really using their brains as well as complex balance activities. And the final exercise is a Parkinson's exercise. So you'll see this in a video form in the Parkinson's PowerPoint. And this is a turn 180 degrees and shifting your pole at the same time. So that is the older adults video done, and we look forward to seeing you in the next